Hi there, this is Josh from Literary Gladiators, and today I'm here to talk about Firestarter by Stephen King. I also have a review for Firestarter by Stephen King, but the difference between the two videos is that this discussion video is going to be subject to spoilers. The review is spoiler-free, so if you have yet to read Firestarter, but you're interested in doing so, or would consider doing so, I would suggest checking out the review. And after you've read it, I would encourage you to come and watch the discussion, because I'd be happy to go beyond the text and discuss this with you. But Firestarter was one of Stephen King's earlier works. It was released in 1980. It was one of his... under the Stephen King name, it was the sixth book. It was Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, The Stand, The Dead Zone, and then Firestarter. This does not include the Richard Bachman books, which were coming out around that time. But Firestarter, the book begins with Charlene McGee, who's known as Charlie, and her dad Andy are on the run from these authorities known as the Shop, and their place comes in several years earlier, where Andy and his recently deceased wife, Vicky, she was Vicky Tomlinson back then, but she became Vicky McGee when they got married. Andy and Vicky were in college, and they volunteered to take... They were given an offer of $200 to take part in an experiment being conducted by Dr. Wanless. And Dr. Wanless was looking to inject them with something known as Lot 6, and he wanted to see what kind of result came out of it. The chances of it being deadly were possible, but the result was the fact that it could provide them with a special kind of power, and in that faction, Andy and Vicky were both given psychic powers, and when they had their daughter Charlie, she was born with pyrokinesis, which pyrokinesis incorporates these psychic powers and the telekinesis powers that were similar to Carrie White's in Stephen King's first novel, Carrie. But in addition, Charlie had the ability to start fires with her mind, which... these fires weren't... my first impression was that all she had to do was backhandedly think about a fire, and a fire would be made. But it was much more than that, and in severe cases, she had to think about the fire intensely. Even though when her and her dad are in the airport, and she has to get the change from the telephone machine, she does use her, when she's trying to get the change out intensely, she ends up burning the feet of a random man. We get his backstory too. No worries about that. He's not so much of a random person, but that's the extent of her power, and but it can get serious in serious situations, and there are serious situations, because the two of them are on the run, and Andy was an English instructor in Ohio. He taught literature and creative writing classes, but he had this intuitive thought that something was wrong, and he came home and found his wife dead in between the washer and dryer. And then he realized that he had to get Charlie, who was supposed to be at her friend's house, but Mrs. Dugan said that she went with some unsuspecting people. She went with these particular people. You get the feeling that people like her and people like the mailman to whom Andy sent a particular notice to, when they were staying at his Granther's place in Vermont, you get that feeling because when he delivered that piece of mail to note people about what was going on, and the person from the shop intercepted it, there was for sure blackmail in that case. With Mrs. Dugan, she seems so mindless about what's going on. You can't help but think that she was blackmailed by the shop, and how they recklessly make their way out of the area, and then he finally catches up to them at a pit stop, and that's their first attack on that, or that's their first escape from them, because Charlie's able to set a fire on them and make her way back into Andy's possession, and they head out. But you see Wainless and Cap Hollister, who's probably his most immediate executor when it comes to kidnapping and then engaging in experiments on Charlie. And it's interesting that, or what happens is that Wainless, he took a stroke, but after the stroke, his interest in Lot 6 and getting Charlie back becomes even more intense, and he becomes more obsessed. But the foil and the curveball within this piece is in the character of John Rainbird. Rainbird is a Cherokee Indian who wants Charlie for his own purposes. And just leading up to this point, Charlie and Andy were staying with Irv and Norma Manders. They were able to chase off a great wave of shop members, but when they get to Granther's and they're about ready to make their escape there, Rainbird puts together his team, and they succeed in capturing them. But by that point, Charlie doesn't want to start fires when she doesn't have to, which she could have started the fire and that would have been the end of it. But she develops a liking for Rainbird, but she's separated from Andy at this time. He's locked up. He's put on weight. He's watching these televangelist programs, and while she develops a liking to Rainbird, eventually she begins to learn what has really happened, and Andy's able to make his way out of the situation. He's able to use the psychic powers that he has in order to force Hollister to do what he wants, and Hollister he caves in. But anytime Andy uses his psychic powers, he ends up developing either a migraine or a nosebleed, or both. And then Charlie's able to take control of her situation, particularly on Hochstetter. And then everything comes to a head. Rainbird shows his true colors, because he did make up these anecdotes about being in... He really was in Vietnam, and that pretty much gives you the idea that he's going against the people from the shop, or he plans to, because he's the one that kills Wainless by suffocation. but he ends up killing Andy as well. Charlie sets everything afire, escapes, goes back to the Manders, but then when things turn out to not, when things are bound to become dangerous, she leaves there too. But it's very interesting to see how the story ends, because it is a commentary on what really defines honest news, because with her situation, they decide to cover a lot up by making it they say it's a terrorist attack, when in actuality it was a particular government faction that brought down, it was a particular government faction known as the Shop, doing experiments on their individuals that caused the whole situation, and it backfired. And when Charlie wants to deliver the story that her father was looking to deliver to a particular outlet, she decides to go with Rolling Stone. One may say, why Rolling Stone? But in actuality, it's why not Rolling Stone? Because I think that a lot of people can agree and make the argument that there are a lot of slanted news agencies on both sides. And to go with something like Rolling Stone that they find to just be objective in its area, that's the right path to engage. So, out of the Stephen King books that I've read as we speak, the books, the novellas, the short works, this one seemed to have the eeriest, most graphic images that really hit me. Which I know that people that have read Carrie and the Pig's Blood and the Period at the beginning, and the other gross outs that have taken place in Stephen King's works. I know that Dreamcatcher has one, and those have hit home to them. But for me, in some weird ways, Firestarter, the whole idea that when they were at the Manders and Charlie set those shop members on fire, in particular Al Stenowitz, there's mention as per page 118 of this copy that his yellow complexion grew positively cheesy, which it's just a quirk of mine, and it really if I think about it intensely, it's really going to hit. It's going to hit me as a reader in that squeamish kind of way. And then describing Herm Pinchot, who was Andy's psychologist at when they were under surveillance and captured. Pinchot was. When he wasn't working, he was a closeted transvestite who enjoyed cross-dress, or who had this who would cross-dress when no one was watching. And with his secret slowly leaking out, he ended up killing himself by sticking his arm into a garbage dispenser. And at the funeral, they described his arm as being vaporized nearly to the elbow, sharpened to the elbow like a pencil. And the images that came out of that were just really, that really was, that's all I can say. My feelings about this book is that the strongest message has to do with the dark underbelly that is the way that authorities tend to act sometimes. And Stephen King cites that in his afterword, where different countries have taken people with certain conditions and enclosed them and almost imprisoned them so that they can engage in experiments which in turn would help benefit them in some ways. And it's not right. It's not right at all, and I think that's what really makes me root for Charlie and Andy. The story's a little bit inconsistent. I think their characters are a bit inconsistent. I think that Charlie in particular, it was very hard to pinpoint how one would describe her demeanor. It was very scattery. I think a lot of the other characters had scattery personalities that were hard to decipher. I think that in ways it creates senses of complications, but I think it was a big challenge to really grasp how these characters were within the piece. But intensity and message really hit home. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 on my Goodreads. It's not my favorite Stephen King work. I think that it was worth. I think that waiting this time, it wasn't something that I regretted waiting for quite some time. But I'm glad that I read it, because I'd like to read everything that Stephen King has written. He's one of my favorite writers. This is definitely, if you're looking to read his backlog, I definitely would not skip this. I would say it was pretty good. Thank you for tuning into this video, and for now, keep reading.